Hello, welcome. My name is Timothy Campbell, and I am Commerce IQ's Head of Industry Insights. And it's my pleasure to be with you today and to go over, like we always do every week, a new topic. And today's topic is something maybe a little bit more tactical than we typically do, but I want to talk to you about, just for about 10 or 15 minutes, the shortcomings of ROAS in retail media. ROAS, has for a long time been a dominant metric in terms of how retail media performance is established and tracked, and it has a lot going for it and a lot of advantages. But it does also have some certain shortcomings. So I want to go over this with you and maybe some ways to overcome them as well, or at the very least, things to supplement ROAS with new metrics, and also just things to be aware of so that you don't fall into any traps that are pertinent to only tracking ROAS. So let's take a look at exactly what I mean here. First off, just setting down some baselines with how the industry is progressing right within retail media. What you see here is our data from Commerce IQ tracked over time from our customers on Amazon, and we've kind of aggregated all of that into this data you see here, and you can take a look at how ad spend and ROAS are performing over time. Ad spend continues to rise. Of course, the retail media landscape is exploding, especially on Amazon, but also elsewhere as other retailers look to get a piece of the pie. And ROAS is, also more recently doing pretty well. I think what we're seeing now is a run up in ROAS values ahead of the summer selling season. Kind of occurred last year as well. But ROAS is increasingly under pressure. I would say, by things like cost per click inflation, kind of driving those costs up. And I think it's interesting to see, maybe ROAS can be supplemented by other metrics to better get at a more holistic understanding of how to measure your ad spend and how to boost performance. So there's a lot of other factors that go into ROAS, right? That you should really, as a brand, you should be tracking, should be aware of. Ideally, it's done in an automated fashion where all of these different variables are kind of tracked alongside ROAS, and it actually directly impacts your advertising strategy in real time. But at the very least, you should be aware of some of these other factors, right? And they're kind of listed here around ROAS, and they should all be communicating and speaking to each other. So first off, your daily budget, right? If your ROAS is high, that's great. But if you're running through your daily campaign budget, in a matter of hours, and suddenly you don't have any budget left for the rest of the day, that's a problem, right? You need to spread out your budget over the course of the day to make sure you're not running out of budget and causing problems and a suboptimal shopping experience as it pertains to your brand. Another one I want to point out here is in stocks, right? Your ROAS, for instance, can be maybe fantastic, right? You're selling through, a minimum amount of ad spend engagement is yielding big returns on certain product lines. By a campaign, but maybe maybe it's selling too well. Maybe those are about to go out of stock, right? Maybe they are out of stock. Suddenly, when that product goes out of stock, your ROAS basically drops to zero. And if you could avoid that by not investing in ad spend in products that are out of stock, or perhaps more importantly, more specifically, products that are about to go out of stock, and that's kind of that weeks of cover variable you see there on the right. If you can forecast that accurately, then you're going to avoid wasted ad spend, right? And of course, that's something that we do at Commerce IQ. We have a fairly accurate system that determines, how can you automatically optimize your ad spend for your inventory to the point where if you are forecast to run out of stock, you kind of turn off the spigot of ad spend for that product, or if you could go out of stock at your current levels of ad spend, maybe just tone it down a little bit. So maybe, your ROAS in the short term doesn't look as good, but you don't go out of stock and you don't actually lose all that opportunity when you are out of stock. Because the other thing to keep in mind is that if you go out of stock, it takes a long time to recover that organic search volume rank that you kind of enjoyed before you went out of stock. So that's another big drawback in terms of why you don't want to do that. And in that sense, you can actually use ROAS, or you can use your ad spend to orchestrate your supply chain in the sense that you can kind of control, you have one lever of control over demand for your product by pulling back or by driving ad spend forward. Other things to keep in mind, ROAS is becoming a bit more strained over time because of cost per click inflation. It's increasingly a more competitive market, right? It's becoming more competitive over time. And then the other thing I want to point out is total sales. ROAS is great for determining efficiency of your ad spend, not necessarily for maximizing total incremental sales, right? Like, for instance, you could invest more ad dollars into your business. Maybe it would actually drive the ROAS down a little bit, but it's still worth it if it's driving incremental sales that are still profitable, right? Even if your ROAS declines a little bit, it still might be worth doing. And you can see here cost per click inflation, as I mentioned, is on average, and this is on Amazon, on the rise over the past 15 months, reaching a recent kind of all-time high about $1.82, and that's on average across all categories. Of course, there's a lot of variation between categories. So what can we do to, aside from linking all these different factors to ROAS and tracking them alongside ROAS, like inventory, total sales, just keeping in mind cost per click inflation, things like that, weeks of cover. What else can we do, right? Well, what else can we track to really get at how to drive your business forward? And I think a key decision that a lot of brands have to make repeatedly is, I have some extra ad dollars. How do I allocate it? How do I spend it to drive sales? And if that is your question, if that is your goal, share of voice becomes a perfect metric for gaining incremental sales. And share of voice is basically your presence on the site. It is typically calculated as how many face outs or how many placements you have within a certain subsegment of search results. So that could be the first page, it could be the top 10 results, it could be the top 50 results, something like that. But how many of those spots do you occupy for a given search term? And what are those? Where on the page do you show up? Right, if you're in the top 1 and 2 spots for a search result or for a search term, that's going to be weighted much more highly than if you're in spots 9 and 10. So the more spots you show up in, and the higher those spots you show up in, that means your share of voice will be higher for that search term. And then, of course, for the category as a whole, the category is kind of the sum total of all of these different relevant search terms. You can think of it as you can include, branded and competitor search terms as well. But even just looking at generic search terms, combine all of those to get at a sense of the kind of the generic non-branded category. You want to make sure you're winning not just top placements for some keywords, but also the most popular and relevant keywords that shoppers are really searching. You want to make sure you're getting top placements in those keywords in particular. Now, that being said, there's a lot of nuance there, and there's a lot of niche opportunities, right? Like maybe there's a keyword where you could be gaining sales if you were investing more ad spend, but you're not doing that currently. You're not even perhaps aware of that opportunity. But if you were to invest a little bit more, beat out the competitors, get some more top placements, it would lead to incremental sales for your brand, right? These are things that share of voice tries to help answer and achieve for your brand. So actually using this as a primary metric for tracking your advertising is I would say is important, because it helps drive total growth, not just the efficiency of your business, but the total growth of your business. Because as long as those dollars are still profitable, even if they're not as profitable as your current ad spend, as long as they're still profitable, they could very well be worth investing in, right? Especially if there's all these niche opportunities under certain keywords that you might be missing out on. So share of voice is a great way of driving incremental growth for your company with your advertising strategy. And this is something that Commerce IQ, we track this automatically on our dashboard. You can take a look at your share of voice by any number of custom curated digital shelves. And the key point I want to end with on here is that share of voice is a leading indicator of sales, right? So ROAS is a lagging indicator, by which I mean it's kind of an after the fact performance report, right, on how you have performed in the past. What share of voice does is it tells you, if you invest so many dollars here, you can boost your share of voice for this keyword or this category by this amount. And if you do that, then that correlates to this increase of sales. So it's a great projection tool that says, if we spend here, we get this return. This allows us to achieve our sales goals. A bit more so than ROAS, which is a bit more backwards looking, right? Now I want to kind of also not just look at, so we've looked at confounding factors of ROAS that make it a little bit more difficult than just looking at ROAS alone. Maybe either a replacement metric or a complementary metric in the form of share of voice that you should be tracking in addition to ROAS. I also want to talk about ROAS itself, and maybe the ways that ROAS are tracked could be a little bit, fall a little bit short just from looking at ROAS alone, right? And to set this conversation up, I want you to think of the different stages of the shopper journey, right? The shopper journey does not start and end when someone searches for something on Amazon, clicks on an ad and buys it, right? That can't happen, but especially for new to brand shoppers, the path to purchase is much longer. Okay, and it really falls into these 5 distinct stages. So first, awareness, right? A shopper may just have recently come to a point where they decide, hey, I want to purchase this category. Or maybe they don't even know that yet, but you're actively reaching out to them with DSP ads to potentially garner that opportunity or garner that interest. We're like, hey, I hadn't thought about this. Maybe I should buy this category. Maybe I should buy this type of product, right? And this is where DSP comes in. And search and DSP combined can be much more effective than just one or the other alone, because you can get that brand awareness from DSP that you might not get from search, because you're actually reaching shoppers that to begin with aren't looking for your product initially, right? So say you gain awareness by using these DSP ads. Then next stage comes the interest stage. Now they're interested, they do a little bit of research. Maybe they go on Amazon, they search for keywords related to the category, related to maybe the top brands in that category, your brand, competitor brands. And here's where you can leverage both search and DSP ads to make sure that your brands show up when they're doing their research, right? So that they remain top of mind during this research stage. The next stage here is the consideration stage. And that's when you're providing regular touch point with shoppers. Well, perhaps they haven't made that decision to purchase yet. They've done a lot of research, but they don't want to be hasty. They don't want to make a decision too quickly. So now they're waiting on that final purchase decision, and you're continuing to show them ads via search, via especially DSP when they're even not on Amazon, to remind them of your brand in particular within the category. And then at that key moment of decision making to purchase, you nudge them towards your brand again, and that can help. And DSP and search can both help with conversion right then. And then retention down the road as they look to restock that product. It's key to continue to leverage search and DSP to make sure that they keep buying your brand in particular, right? So there's a lot of things here that can feed into a longer shopper journey. Now, a few things to keep in mind here. This requires a lot of data on your shoppers, and it requires proper performance and shopper tracking, right? You have to know who your shopper is, what they're doing over time, be able to track their performance or ad engagement over time so that you can reach them with the correct and relevant ads. And a lot of this is available on Amazon Marketing Cloud. And we offer a kind of complete integration with Amazon Marketing Cloud to track search and DSP performance, and also which bucket you should be investing in, which combination of ads you should be investing in. Ecommerce IQ. But all this kind of tees up the conversation that if the shopper journey is that long, it has those distinct stages, maybe the traditional ways that we evaluate ROAS aren't really the best ways to go about it, right? The most, I think, popular way that vendors track ROAS is this last touch ad attributed approach, last touch attribution, which basically says if a shopper purchases a product from your brands and they viewed an ad beforehand, credit to that purchase goes to the last ad they viewed. Well, as we've just seen throughout this whole shopper journey, they're engaging in DSP ads in terms of gaining awareness of the brand. They're seeing search and DSP ads while they're researching the brand. Especially true for new to brand shoppers. And keep in mind, new to brand shoppers are some of your most desirable shoppers because it's purely incremental to your brand, right? That's what you really want to be going after to gain those incremental sales. And that's also the exact area where the path to purchase is longer. And if you're using that last touch ad attribution approach, it's only going to show maybe that last search ad that they happened to click on before they made that purchase, and not every other step along that path that got them to even consider your brand in the first place through the awareness, research, and conversion stages. So what we recommend instead is using a multi-touch attribution with a lifetime sales view. All right. And what this means is that when that shopper makes a purchase, you're not only attributing it to that most recent search ad that they clicked on for your brand, but you're also attributing it kind of in equal parts or proportionally relevant parts to all those ads they engaged of yours along the way that were all crucial to driving that sale. Because if that last ad had been the only one that occurred, it wouldn't have enough to convert. It wouldn't have been enough to drive the sale in many instances. The other aspect of this is lifetime sales, right? Because that shopper, the attribution window for that last touch ad attribution is typically 14 days. If they buy within 14 days of that ad, then it gets attributed to it. But they could come back months later and restock on your brand, right? Is that attributed to that ad? No, it's not. But it's still very relevant because, again, if those ads weren't shown, they wouldn't have gone back and continued to purchase that product over time. So a lifetime sales value is important to incorporate in what you're looking at. Again, this is available on our Amazon Marketing Cloud Insights. And Ecommerce IQ, we've also integrated our dashboard with it to make it very easy to not just track performance here, but also move funds between different ad types and different combinations of ad types to make sure you're getting the best possible return. And using multi-touch and lifetime sales approach is a great way to boost how you track ROAS. So you're not just looking at it in a very limited sense. Now, one point here, I've mentioned search and DSP. It's important when you're using multi-touch ad attribution and you're using that lifetime view of sales. Frequently, that means you're going to be investing more in DSP than you otherwise would. And while last touch ad attribution shows that DSP doesn't have a great ROAS, doesn't have a great return on ad spend, using that more expanded definition of ROAS that I talked about with multi-touch attribution, with lifetime sales, that's going to show that DSP actually has a much greater impact than initially you might guess. And indeed, the data bears this out, just looking at pure, performance of different ad campaigns and how they combine their different ad types. Actually campaigns and strategies that combine DSP and sponsored products have about almost 3 times the amount of return that sponsored products and search alone does. So definitely worth investing in both. And the key to investing in both is making sure you're tracking it accurately. And that means an expanded definition of ROAS tracking with multi-touch attribution and lifetime sales. And it also means not just looking at ROAS alone, but looking at all those other factors we talked about, inventory, in stocks, keeping in mind cost per click, inflation, total incremental sales, in addition to just ad efficiency. And the key thing for incremental sales is you really want to be tracking share of voice as your strategy to drive future sales, and not just a past looking report that ROAS tends to provide. So you keep all of this in mind, you do all of this, you're gonna have a much stronger ad strategy than you would if you're just looking at your basic definition of ROAS and ROAS alone. All right, with that being said, I think that wraps us up for the day. So thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and I will get to it then. I will get to it, after the fact. I can email you or send you a message. And have a great rest of your week. And I look forward to presenting on a totally new topic to you next week for 10 to 15 minutes. And until then,